students, welcome back to lesson number 26, and we're continuing this economic lesson. We're covering the microeconomic part. I promise we'll be done with this soon so we can move on to macroeconomics after this, but mainly what I want to cover today is going to be about another market structure, namely oligopoly. But before I do, I need to cover two things, okay? The first thing we're going to cover is the homework question from last time. Last time we asked you about two different kind of efficiencies, right? If you remember, there was, I believe the first one we talked about was something called as allocative efficiency, right? Allocative. And the other word we discussed in length was productive, right? So allocative versus productive. And this is regarding efficiency, okay? So just to recap real quick, allocative efficiency is a concept where it says that in order to be allocatively efficient, what you need to do is that you need to make sure that when you manufacture something, right, when your producers are making something, their cost is equivalent to the benefit that the society is getting. And so the way mathematically we produce that answer or result is, I'm going to show you an arrow here, but the basic equation on this side of the board says MB, which is your marginal benefit, right, must equal your marginal cost, okay? MC. So if MC equals MB, right, you're allocatively efficient, okay? It's very important. MC equals MB, you're allocatively efficient. So this basically says that as long as your marginal cost equals your marginal benefit, the society is happy because they're getting the benefit out of it, and the producer is happy because he's producing it at a cost that the society wants it to produce at. So being allocatively efficient is extremely important. If someone asks in a test question, what's allocative efficiency? Well, you know that using your equation, basically if you remember this equation, MC equals MB, you know that it's allocatively efficient, okay? The second kind of efficiency we talked about is this thing right here, which is productive efficiency, right? So productive efficiency basically discusses the fact that when I produce something, right? If I'm a producer, I'm making something, take it anything, right? You know, we talked about pizza in this class before, so, you know, if I'm producing pizza, right, let's make sure that if I produce this pizza, that I'm producing at the minimum cost possible. Why is that important? Well, basically, when you're producing something at the minimum cost, what that allows you to do is that it makes sure that society is not wasting its resources, okay? Being most efficient. So productive efficiency, when we discuss this mathematically, right, we say that marginal cost, right, is being produced at minimum ATC. And ATC stands for, of course, your average total cost. Okay? So that's the equation. So this one, MC equals MB for allocative efficiency. For productive efficiency, it's marginal cost equals minimum ATC. So that we know that when we're producing something, we're producing at the least possible cost. Okay? The way we do it is minimum ATC. All right, so I'm glad we got that out of the way. This is that was a homework question from lesson 25. Lesson 26, we're gonna, before we hop on to oligopoly, I want to cover one last thing. And the topic is going to be called as price discrimination. You've probably heard of it before, but I'm going to write it down here so we all know what I'm referring to. But price discrimination is a concept that you see every day, I guarantee it. And it happens when you buy gas, you buy you know, any commodity. If it, you know, typically if it's a monopoly, you get to see price discrimination. So let's talk about price discrimination. Price discrimination. Okay, so how does price discrimination happen? Price discrimination basically happens when, I discussed this before, when you have a monopoly, right? So let's take a monopoly. Okay, and there's been a lot of monopolies that we've talked about in this class, but the one I'm going to pick before is going to be, say, Microsoft. Okay, and technically speaking, legally, Microsoft is not a monopoly because they would get trouble into that. But just say, let's just say Company A. Okay, Company A is a monopoly. Okay. And what they can do is they can offer you a product. Let's say I have a monopoly in making cameras. Okay, I make cameras. I'm the only person in the world who makes cameras. And if you want a camera, you got to buy it from me. Okay, so if I have this power to price discriminate, what I can do is you, person A, okay, I'm going to offer the camera for $1,000. Okay, a person B is going to come up to me from a different point of view. Maybe you bought it from my shop. This person's going to go online, and you know what? Because they went online, I'm going to give a special online discount for $800. Okay? Now another person C is going to come up to me, and they need it immediately. Okay? And they go and they call me on phone. They say I need it immediately, and I say, you know what? It needs to be about $1,200. And this is how you price discriminate. You know, the other way you probably see this before is if you ever bought airline tickets, okay, you can go through a travel agent, okay? You can go online, maybe through Expedia.com, all right? This is not an advertisement at all. I'm just giving you an example. Or like you can go to another website like Travelocity or something. The point is that different people on the same plane, when you're going on a plane, right? If you turn to the person next to them, don't do this, but if you ask them, okay, how much did you pay? I guarantee they'd not pay the same price as you. The idea being that the way, if an airline, if they have a particular plane, the way they compensate is that if some person bought it for full price, they're going to make sure someone gets a discount. So on average, they make a profit. Okay? So this is price discrimination. The concept is that the same product is being offered at different price points. Okay? It's not fair, yeah, but you know this is how businesses make money, and they're smart about it. So let's talk about the 3 conditions that you need to have for price discrimination to actually take place. Number 1. Number 1 is the firm must have monopoly pricing power. Must have monopoly pricing power. And what does that mean? You know, when we discussed about monopolies, right, we talked about pricing power. Okay, when we talked about monopolies, we discussed this idea of the power that they hold in market. The idea that because they're the only person with that differentiated product, with that special product, and no one else can have it, they have the ability to dictate what prices what people can buy it at, right? Because say, for example, right, we were looking at a perfect competition. We talked about this before. An example was, say, a wheat farmer, okay? And say, for example, this guy says that, you know, I'm going to offer you wheat at $10, another guy, I'll offer $8, another guy at $6. If it's perfect competition, there are a lot of competitors. What you're going to do is, no, I don't want to buy it from you. I want to buy it from someone else who gives it a cheaper price. So for that matter, right, that's why when we say purchasing power is important or setting power is important, if this does not happen, right, you're just going to go to another person and buy it at a cheaper cost. So you can have price discrimination if there are a lot of competitors, okay? So this is, that's why this is an extremely important point. Number 2 is the following. Number 2 says, firm must be able to identify and separate groups of consumers. Okay, what do we mean by this? I'll tell you exactly. Identify and separate customers or consumers. Okay, what do we mean by this? All right, so say I have a particular demographic, okay? I'm offering these cameras, okay, and I know that between 20 to 25-year-old kids, these guys are really internet savvy, okay? They're gonna go online, they're gonna see who's the best, you know, guy offering me the best lowest price, okay? But I know for a fact that my maybe 50 to 60-year-olds are not so internet savvy. They're kind of old school. They want to go to the store and kind of see, you know, kind of touch the product and, you know, not compare as such. And if they're happy with the customer service, they're going to buy the product. So the list of specifications they look for in buying that particular product is different from my 20 to 25-year-olds, okay? So for that reason, if I can separate, right, these two, maybe I can see that online I can attract these guys at a different price, and the people who are coming to my store, I pay a little extra to my salesman to make sure they get good customer service and charge a premium. The point is that if I can separate and identify my consumers, right, I have the ability to dictate different prices, okay? Because if I don't, and if I treat my consumers all at one bucket, I can't really say, okay, you, I get to charge more, the other person, you know, it doesn't work that way. You need to be able to make sure that your consumers can fall in different buckets, so that way each bucket of consumers gets assigned a particular price point, okay? So number 2 is making sure we can identify and separate consumers. Number 3 says that the firm must be able to prevent resale between consumers. Okay, how about this? Prevent, that E is crooked, okay. Prevent resale. You know, have you guys ever bought something, you know, maybe in bulk, you know, for those of you who've not been to Costco, I'm sorry, Costco's a great store. But basically, if you go to Costco, somewhere wholesale retailer, you get to buy products in bulk, right? And if you buy it in bulk, you always see on this individual item, it says on the back somewhere, I guarantee you, it says item not for resale, okay? And what that means is, say for some reason I make, let's say I make soy milk, okay? I make chocolate soy milk, all right? And you go to Costco, this wholesale retailer, okay? You go in there and you buy, I don't know, 20 cartons of soy milk, right? Now, imagine if I bought it at bulk, I obviously get a discount, right? So say for some reason I bought it at, $5 a carton, okay? And in the market, if I go to my Ralph's or somewhere, some supermarket, wherever, or a grocery store, the retail price is around $7, right? So what if I do this? What if I buy it at a wholesale retailer for $5, right, and sell it at $6, right? So I make a profit out of this difference, right? So for that reason, what that manufacturer wants to make sure is that they make a profit out of making sure that these people at Costco and your local grocery store are having price discrimination so they can charge different prices. But if I, the consumer, start to resale stuff, I take the profits out of their products, and they're not going to be happy with that. So for that reason, as a retailer or as a manufacturer, of this soy milk, right? What you're going to do is on these soy milk cartons, each one of them you're going to say item not for resale. So you make sure you prevent consumers from reselling the same product at a profit. Okay? So the three conditions are as follows. One is the firm must have monopolizing pricing power, right? So I can dictate how to set each prices. Two is identify and separate my consumers, so I know who is what, so that I can charge different prices, right? And they're reasonable to all these consumers, otherwise they won't buy it, right? Number three is prevent resale, otherwise my profits are going to start to decline, and consumers are going to make profit out of it, and I'm not, right? And my point, remember guys, econ number 1 point is firm must make profit, okay? Firm must make profit. All right, so these are the three conditions for price discrimination. Important point, especially when you discuss monopolies. You might see this on a test somewhere, just know about it. In general economic and business sense, also very important because it really you get to see how people charge different things. And what's really cool, guys, is that if you take these economic concepts, they might look pretty boring on paper, but actually if you think about it in real world setting, they can be a lot more interesting. You get to understand why things work a certain way when you buy a certain product, okay? So always, whenever you learn anything from class, try to apply it in real life because one, it makes more sense for you because it's more interesting, and two, you get to really understand the concept because it's really put in use, okay? So that's my advice. That being said, let's move on to oligopoly, okay? And oligopoly is a very interesting market because I guarantee you guys have all seen oligopolies before. I'll give you examples of oligopolies. And we're going to talk about that word that you probably heard already, called cartels. But with that being said, let's talk about an oligopoly. So what are the main points behind oligopoly? Okay, so let's talk about the four main characteristics. We've talked about monopoly before. We've talked about perfect competition. Now let's talk about oligopoly and talk about the four characteristics that define an oligopoly. Okay, so what is an oligopoly? Okay, to be an oligopoly, okay, to have a market that's operates like an oligopoly, you must have four characteristics. What's the first one? First one's kind of really generic, okay? Basically says that you have a few large producers. Really generic, right? And we'll get specific with this a little bit into class, but few large producers. Okay? What do we mean by this? Well, there's not too many because if there's a lot of producers, it's going to turn into what? Perfect competition, right? Because if there are a lot of people, remember, perfect competition has a lot of small, right, independent producers, right? This one has a few large. Monopoly has just one large producer, right? So this one has a few large producers. Let's think about examples about few large producers. One of the examples that pops in my mind is if you've ever been on a plane, okay? There are two main companies that make planes, okay? There's Boeing, right? I'm not spelling this right. Boeing, right? Is that how you spell it? No. I think it's Boeing. Anyways, Boeing, and then there's Airbus, okay? So, if you've heard of a 777 or a 747, That's Boeing, and then these are your A380s or whatnot. Anyways, this class is not about Boeing and Airbus. It's about the fact that you have an industry, the airline industry, and they make there are two main manufacturers out of this, right? So you have a few large producers that control majority of the market. You probably heard of Gulfstream, things like that, but they're small producers. But these two guys control most of the market, okay? So what that means is you have a few large producers. They're not just one. It's not just Boeing. It's not just Airbus. It's Boeing. It's the two companies that dominate the market together, okay? And that's the idea behind an oligopoly. It's a few large producers. There's not a particular number. Just for example's sake, I'm sure in your class someone has been like 3 firms, 4 firms. Not really, we don't have an exact number, okay? But we just have a general term, and we'll talk about that a little more about, this particular item, okay? But let's move on to number 2. The second characteristic says that differentiated or standardized product. Let's talk about this. Standardized versus differentiated. Okay, so what have you ever? So let's talk about a standardized product, and then we'll talk about a differentiated product. All right, let's talk about a standardized product. All right, so when you have a car, okay, or a motorcycle, you need gas, right? You need oil. So when you go to a gas station, okay, and let's pick a company, right? Let's pick Chevron, okay, and you go and get gas, okay, or one day you decide to go to another station, you go to Shell, and you get gas. You think there's a big difference between the two companies? Not really, right? So generally speaking, a product like oil or gas, right? Oil, right, is pretty standardized. There's not much of a difference. Now, people might tell you there's a big difference, right? They have different octanes, right? You can get special high octane and get premium octane, medium octane. The idea is, for the most part, right, oil is pretty standardized. Same with another product. Let's take milk, right? I mean, yeah, there's chocolate milk, there's soy milk, all sorts, but let's talk about regular milk. There's not much of a taste difference, right? So people try to differentiate themselves even in milk. For the most part, it's a pretty standardized product, okay? But now let's talk about a standard differentiated product, okay? Let's talk about a product like maybe Gatorade, okay? Okay, versus another drink maker. Let's pick some company. Let's pick maybe Sobe or Life Water, or there's Vitamin Water, something like that, right? The idea is in beverages, right, it's extremely differentiated as a product because people prefer a certain type of taste. Maybe you like lemon, maybe you like orange, whatever. The idea is that the beverage market, right, is a lot more differentiated, right, as a product. So if I want to go in and I want to buy Coke, I know exactly how Coke tastes like. I know why I prefer Coke over Pepsi or whatnot. Right? The idea is that's an extremely differentiated product. It's not like you buy Gatorade or Sobe or Vitamin Water and you have the same taste, right? So it can come in 2 forms. Now, oligopoly as a market tends to be actually kind of generic, right? It's not really well defined. I mean, we're talking about it could be standardized or differentiated. We're talking about a few large producers. We don't have an exact number, but you should get the idea of what it is. And the way we're trying to do this is by giving you guys examples, okay? So let's talk about characteristic number 3 over here. Characteristic number 3, I'm going to erase this over here, but characteristic number 3 is the following. It says that I'll just write in simple terms, let's talk about entry barriers. Okay, so remember in monopoly, right, we've talked about significant barriers, right? So for a person to come in, right, and start the diamond business, right, they can't just walk in there and start, because De Beers as a company is going to make sure that they protect the resources. So I can't just walk in and start producing diamonds out of nowhere, right? So there's significant barriers. But let's talk about perfect competition. In perfect competition, there are no barriers, right? We said it's really easy for people to walk in and out. If there are profits, people come in. If there are losses, people go out. But the idea is there's not really major barriers to get in. In a oligopoly, there are entry barriers. Why? Because of the fact that there are a few large producers that have some sort of pricing ability, and they're going to make sure that they protect you. Otherwise, if there were no entry barriers, what this is going to happen is it's going to turn from an oligopoly to a what? To a perfect competition, right? Because if there's no entry barriers, it's a perfect competition. but there are entry barriers, and that's how these 3 or 4 or 5 large producers make sure that they have the control over this market, right? So there are entry barriers. Now, not, if for monopoly we went into specific entry barriers, this one I'm not going to give you too many because, it's just depends on the market that there is, right? Monopoly or an oligopoly in oil is different from an oligopoly in in the airline manufacturing industry, right? So there's different criteria for different ones, but I understand that there are entry barriers, okay? So with that being said, pretty simple and straightforward, we'll move on to number 4. Number 4 says that there's mutual interdependence, okay? Mutual, it's supposed to be a U, interdependence, okay? So what do we mean by this? Interdependence. I am not spelling well today. Okay. Mutual interdependence. Okay, what is that fancy word over there that I can't even barely say? Okay, so it basically says that if you have, let's take the airline industry, okay? So there's 2 people that make it. There's Boeing and there's Airbus, okay? So I'll be Boeing for this example and you be Airbus, okay? And what's gonna happen is that, you're making, planes at a particular point, I'm making airlines at a particular price point. And all of a sudden I realize, you guys are charging at a particular point. What if I charge less than you, right? I mean, the products are not, they're still great planes. Both of us have different features, I understand. For the most part, it's not a big difference, right? So if I cut my price, I can steal the consumers that you have, the customers, I can steal your customers, right? So for that being, what this basically says is that the way customers react in your market, right? If they come to you as Airbus, if they come to me at Boeing, it really depends on how we set our prices, right? That's why mutual interdependence is extremely important. In oligopolies, it can turn brutal because if it's a price war, right, I can, start cutting prices, right, and I can steal all your consumers, and it can get pretty nasty, right? So for that being, what do you want in an oligopoly? Okay, you as Airbus, me as Boeing, right? If we start cutting prices, we're going to start to steal each other's consumers. Yeah, that's fine, but we're destroying our profits in the process. So what really we want is us to just stay at a price point so that you and I are not having too much fluctuation and both of us make enough profit so both of us are happy, right? So that we're going to start talking about, in a bit, and we're going to start to get into cartels, right? Which is illegal, by the way. But the point is that there is a certain balance that lies within these firms within the industry, because otherwise, right, you can really destroy the industry in itself. So we're going to try to make sure that there's no cannibalization in oligopoly, and we're going to make sure there's a mutual interdependence. So really understand that from an economic perspective, that the way a certain firm acts in a monopoly, or excuse me, in an oligopoly, will affect the other firm, right? Because the way you change your pricing points will affect the competitor directly. So understand that point, okay? That being said, let's move on to this concept here I talked about. I said a few large producers, and let's start to define it, okay? And there's one term that really comes up, okay? And let me erase this. I hope everybody got this stuff. But so we said a few large, and you're probably thinking, what does that mean? What's a few? 3, 4, 5, right? So economists want to make this a little more specific, and they come up with a concept called concentration ratio, okay? Concentration ratio. Okay, concentration ratio. What does concentration ratio say? It says that if you have a particular amount of firms, right? So let's, we've taken that airline industry as an example. So let's take Boeing and Airbus, right? They're two of the major players. And let's say that Boeing, right? Company B is going to be Boeing. Company A will be, Airbus, okay? This is Boeing, this is Airbus, okay? So let's say company A, as in Airbus, has a 35% share, okay? They control 35% of the market, right? So consumers, on average, 35% of them go to Airbus. The other hand, let's say Boeing controls about 40% of the market. Now, these are not numbers I'm just making this up. I really don't know the market in specific. So these are numbers I'm just making up for the example, right? And the rest, of course, make up 25%, right? 75, 25. Okay. So basically, the small guys make up about 25%, but the big chunk is taken by Airbus and Boeing, okay? In a concentration ratio, the way we describe the market is we take the two largest, or whoever's the largest chunk, right? These guys, right? And we say that there are two firms with a concentration ratio. I'm going to say C ratio, so that stands for concentration ratio, right? Ratio of 40 plus 35. You just add up the market shares, 75%. Okay? So the way we describe this market is say, okay, well, the airline industry has two manufacturers, two major manufacturers. Together they control about 75% of the market. And we're going to say that the way we describe this market is there's two firms, 75% market. That's the way you say concentration ratio. Okay? Now the general rule that I've kind of heard in classes and whatnot, and what people generally assume is the following. They assume that if there are four firms, okay, four firms with a concentration ratio of 40%. This can be defined as an oligopoly. This is a general guideline, okay? General guideline, okay? So, does it mean that if there's 5 firms with like 30%, is that an oligopoly or not? It's kind of generic. It's kind of a lot of gray area involved with this. But in general, we say that if there's 4 firms, at least 4 firms with 40%, if it's 2 firms with 50%, obviously it's an oligopoly, right? But, this is a general guideline that you can probably use and talk about. So if there's a question about oligopoly, talk about concentration ratio, because it seems like you understand a lot more about oligopoly. The fact that, a general guideline in general could be 4 firms with 40% concentration ratio. All right, so that being said, at this point, I think we're going to wrap this up because I think talking about our 4 special characteristics and talking about the concentration ratio gives you a slight idea about oligopoly. The one other thing we can talk about is cartels in the future, right, and how those discuss. But that's going to be a topic that we can discuss in the next class. This one, the homework question for this one is going to be pretty simple, straightforward. It's going to be, what are the 4 characteristics that define oligopoly, all right? The reason why I'm asking you guys about these special characteristics is that I want you all to understand each market structure. Because if you remember those 4 things, generally you'll remember, okay, how does things work in that market, okay? So 4 characteristics of an oligopoly, come back in the next lesson. I hope this class was useful in understanding oligopoly. Hopefully we'll see you guys in the next lesson. Thank you so much for joining me.